Welcome. This practice begins with a few standing postures, which are yang in nature. And then we'll get into the yin sequence, which includes both sides of dragon pose, both sides of square pose with a lateral bend, and both sides of half saddle pose. Some useful props. Might be a little bit of wall space for some of the standing postures, but also if you want to take the options of legs up the wall for your resting pose at the end of practice. Also, if you have a formal yoga bolster, that might be useful for half saddle pose, but if you don't have a bolster, remember you can always make a construction out of pillows and blankets. Another useful prop might be a yoga block if you have one, but you can also substitute books for a yoga block here. Again, it depends on your manifestation, your being, your ranges of motion, and your intention for class, whether you want to use lots of props or no props at all. It's up to you. You might need to use more than what I suggest. The theme for class today will be a metaphorical look at what I call a Teeter Totter. We'll get started standing. So make your way slowly to mountain pose. And mountain pose is basically standing with integrity, standing with confidence, standing with stability here. So you can take some time to get into mountain pose. So feet are stable width apart, as close together as far apart as they need to, so that you feel stable, and take a moment to root through the bottoms of your feet. That means feel the contact points of all of each foot through the ground, and then lightly tone. So you lightly tone through your legs and the rest of your body by just bringing awareness to your lower legs, your upper legs, your hips, your torso. Bring your spine back to neutral, roll your shoulders back, arms are extended alongside your head. Maybe chin is slightly tucked and moved back so that the crown of your head is trying to point up towards the ceiling. This all requires some subtle muscular toning to do all of this. And then notice the inner stability that you have created yourself through this motion. If you want to feel more open through the heart center, maybe turn the palms to face forward. This turns the arms and subtly rolls the shoulders back. And just notice how that feels here. At some point, bring your awareness to other things going on in your body and in the room. Maybe notice the tension in your face and see if you can release it. So soften your jaw, soften your eyes, soften your face. So you might be lightly toning to maintain a sense of stability in mountain pose. But your head, your eyes, your brain is in a yin state, is trying to remain soft and passive. Maybe you can notice your breath, your inhales and exhales. Begin to lengthen your breath here. As much as you can, that still feels comfortable. Maybe you can feel your heartbeat. Maybe you can hear sounds around you. Maybe you can feel a few light aches and pains here in mountain pose. You can just stay here with a sense of attention and mental focus. But you can also try this breathing exercise. I'm going to suggest a very long, balanced breath, 7 to 7 breathing. So when you get to your next exhale, exhale a little bit more out. And then inhale slowly to a count of 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Pause and then exhale to the same slow count of 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So 3 more rounds of this. And if this is too strainful, then just go back to a normal natural breath. Inhale 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Exhale 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Inhale 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Exhale 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This last one, you're on your own for the count. then just bring your breath back to a normal, natural breath. Notice it for a while. And now that you have gained some experience balancing on two legs, we'll try tree pose next. Try is the operative word here. We'll do this in stages. So we're trying to balance on one leg at a time. This is where a wall might be handy. So if you don't like balancing on one leg or you're uncertain about it, bring yourself to a wall so that you have the wall handy to steady yourself if you become unsteady. We'll try the right leg first. So root through the right foot, tone through the right leg, and shift your weight onto the right leg to tell the right leg you're going to try and balance on it here. And then stage number one with the left leg is bend the left knee softly. Switch, kind of externally rotate the left knee out to the left 90 degrees. And you can start out with your left toes on the ground and your left heel resting on your right ankle or right shin here. So this is a perfectly good tree pose. You can stay here. Maybe you need the wall for a little bit of confirmation here. Hands can be at your sides or they can be at heart center. So this is a good first stage for tree. Second stage for tree is maybe try to move your left foot up to your calf just to see how that feels. And then for some people, maybe you want to move that left foot all the way up to your right thigh. Press your right thigh into the left foot into the right thigh. And then try to balance here. Hands can be out to the side, or hands can be at heart center, or maybe a little bit of wall space here. Find your tree today. And then just kind of stay here for a couple more breaths. And then wherever you're at, release. And then shake it all out. Maybe that right leg that was a little bit of a workout for the right leg. But that motivates the left leg now. So root through the left foot, tone through the left leg. Tell the left leg you're going to balance on it now here. So right knee bends, sweep the right leg out to the right, and you can start out with just right toes on the ground, right heel resting on that left shin. And then stay here, and then just notice the balance, notice the micro muscles working to kind of shift your weight back and forth to maintain the balance. Or if you're comfortable, try something a little bit more challenging, or maybe a lot more challenging, until you find your version of tree pose here. And again, a wall can be handy here to just get used to the sense of this idea of balance. And then maybe after another breath, you kind of release that right leg. You can shake the left leg out. And then we're moving into ragdoll pose, a standing forward fold. So for this, you can gently soften your knees and bend them as much as you want. Slowly roll your torso forward. Again, feet are stable like mountain pose feet. And then when you get over as far as you are, maybe you have to adjust your feet a little bit. Maybe clasp opposite elbows and allow your arms to just hang. Maybe move them around in circles. You can release your neck and bob your head, yes, and kind of shake your head, no, and just maybe even kind of sway back and forth very gently to kind of coax muscles in your upper body to soften. One more breath here. And then look down at the floor, release your arms, bend your knees deeply, and slowly bring yourself down to onto hands and knees. Come into table pose. Rearrange your hands and your knees so that you are in a stable table, nice neutral spine here. We'll do a few cat and cows here. So first, cat pose. So flex your spine, round it up towards the ceiling, tuck your head, tuck your chin, tuck your tailbone. And then come into cow pose, come into a back bend. So now our belly sinks and the sternum kind of moves forward, the tailbone tips up here. And then come back into cat. And we'll do maybe 3 more cycles of this. Slowly move into cow, And if you want to create kind of a vinyasa flow, then maybe you exhale into cat and inhale as you move into cow. Maybe one more cycle here. And then bring yourself back to a nice neutral table pose. We'll do a little bit of a lateral bend here. So root through your front hands, root through the back right knee, extend the left leg out behind you, foot flexed. And then take your left leg and swing it over to the right as far as you can. So maybe you can get the left foot on the outside of the right foot, plant the left toes into the ground here. And then look back at your left toes over your right shoulder. So you have to you're bending your torso to look back around at that back foot here. Maybe hold this for a breath and just notice how this feels. And then bring yourself back to center. And then other side here. So extend the right leg out. And then swing the right leg over to the left on the other side of the left leg. Look over the left shoulder and then see if you can notice that lateral bend in the right side opening. And then slowly bring yourself back to center. And that was kind of the yang warm-up for practice. So this is the first long-held yin posture. So we're moving into dragon. So from hands and knees, bring the right foot forward in between your hands. Inch the left knee back. And if you need padding under that left knee or that left ankle, then please place some pillow or a blanket underneath that here. Maybe you need some height underneath your hands. Maybe their hands don't reach the ground. So place some blocks or some books underneath there. Maybe this is generating too much pain somewhere in the back knee. So maybe inverted dragon is a better option. So for inverted dragon, slowly make your way out of dragon. Right leg is straight as you lay yourself onto your back. Bring the left knee in. This can be your dragon. Maybe you grab the left shin or the right shin, or maybe you grab the right foot and then draw that right knee down as far as you go. And this can be your version of dragon today. Otherwise, if this version of dragon works, this is where we'll stay for a few minutes. So, an early reminder, we're staying in postures for somewhere between 3 and 4 minutes on the side. Now that's just the arbitrary time that I've picked to stay in postures. That's one of the dimensions of a yin class, or a yin practice. And what it means is you try. Maybe you can stay longer, so maybe stay longer. Maybe you can only stay 1 or 2 minutes, so that's how long you stay. And then you come out when your body, your sensations are telling you that you have enough here. You can adjust where your foot is. You can adjust where your hands and arms are. You can adjust where your head and your neck is. The idea behind yin is to soften the muscle fiber and to stay for a certain amount of time so that the light exercise gets into the connective tissue and there's a less emphasis on the muscle fiber here. So the 3 principles that are followed in a yin practice are, first of all, find your edge. Your edge is that particular shape that your manifestation takes, where it stops and it starts to feel something. Whatever that is for you. And we're going to talk about that. That's actually the theme for class, is we're talking about the childhood playground toy called the Teeter Totter. We're using that as a metaphor for noticing the edge, noticing our edge, no matter if it's a yin practice or a yang yoga practice. That's what the theme is to find this edge, find this stopping point for us. Second principle is called stillness. Once we found an edge that's appropriate for us, now we just try to cultivate the patience to stay and monitor that edge, to focus and keep your attention on it, because the edge is going to change in subtle ways. And then when we notice it changing, we can respond to that change. Third principle is called time. Time means once we found our edge, once we've become still, we stay for a period of time. But during the yin practice, it also means staying aware and maybe making changes as our edge change here. So we have about a half a minute, about 5 more breaths here on this side of dragon. If you're feeling pain or trauma, then you need to come out and to rest or find modifications here. If you're here and the initial sensations have disappeared, you can go a little bit deeper until they re-emerge. They don't have to be comfortable, but they can't be painful. So you play around with going a little bit deeper here. But maybe just one more breath here in dragon. And then we'll slowly make our way out, or inverted dragon. So if you're in dragon, maybe you can try the yang pose of downward facing dog as a counter pose. So you tuck the back foot, lift the back knee, plant the front hands, and see if you can press yourself slowly up into downward facing dog. And sometimes this feels a lot better than dragon. If you've been spending a lot of time in dragon, you can pedal your heels, you can make little motions. Maybe you'd prefer cat and cow to downward facing dog. But at some point, do come back to table pose. And then bring the left foot up. Bring the right leg back here. Find your dragon pose, and maybe upside down dragon is a better option, or inverted dragon. Use padding as you feel fit here. Maybe again you need a block underneath a hand or two here. And then we'll settle in for time. So get in touch with your sensations, be they physical, mental, or emotional. Maybe we start with the physical sensations to keep us physically safe. Once we understand and are noticing those, then we can go deeper into our mental sensations, our emotional sensations about this posture. Check in with your breath. Use your breath to help you soften in those places where you're feeling the pressure. So for a lot of people, we feel the pressure somewhere running through the hips in this posture, maybe the front thigh and that back leg. And there's maybe other pressures like in the knee or in the ankle back there, maybe the ankle and the foot up front, maybe even the shoulders for holding this up. So it's good to notice all of those things. So a couple more minutes here. So there's this traditional Eastern symbol that is called the Tajita. We Westerners probably just simply call it the yin-yang symbol. We've kind of culturally appropriated that symbol. You see it, you pretty much see it everywhere now. And what that symbol represents, it's a representation in its most basic form of a balance. Now, we Westerners maybe crudely just say, oh yeah, this is the balance of opposites, but that's oversimplistic. Maybe a slightly more careful definition of that symbol is that it's the dynamic balance between contrasting polarities in which the universe and life manifests itself in. It's the symbol, it's the round circle with the white and the black swirly bits with the 2 dots in them is what I'm talking about. And that's what it represents. It doesn't really represent a balance between opposites. It's more of a dynamic dance between relative contrasts. And that's what we tend to see and label things that we encounter and experience in life, including yoga postures here. In this yoga posture, we can experience this for about five more breaths, if that's appropriate. Maybe it's time to come out for a few people. Maybe if you're not feeling anything, go a little bit deeper in this posture. Maybe that symbol doesn't make much sense to us since it's not part of our culture. So a more common metaphor is the child's playground toy of what I call the Teeter Totter. Now, another name for a Teeter Totter is a seesaw, but of course, probably there's a half a dozen other names out there that people call this playground toy. But we do need to come out of this side of the dragon here. So slowly bring yourself out of this side of the dragon. You can do it however you would like to. It can be slowly and deliberate. It can be going back into downward facing dog. Maybe you want to stretch that front leg out so you come into kind of a half monkey pose here. Whatever you'd like to do to work out the kinks. This is kind of the free form counter pose time to make your way out of dragon pose. And then while you're working out the kinks of dragon, I'll set up for the next yin posture. The next yin posture is called square pose. So you'll come to seated, and maybe you want to sit up on a little bit of height. The legs start out in front here. And then, by the way, if you have a block, maybe have a block handy or some books, just in case you want to incorporate the lateral bend in this version of square pose. So bend the left knee and bring the left shin sort of parallel to the front of your mat if you're using a mat, or perpendicular to your line of sight here. So just kind of across here. Bend your right knee and see if you can stack your right knee on top, your right shin on top of your left shin. Not all of us can do this without pain. And so if you're experiencing that this is not happening or it's creating intense pain, this might mean that this posture is not for you. Now, if there's just a little bit of sharp achiness in the knees or the ankles, you can maybe mitigate that with prop. So if this knee is floating and it's feeling unstable because it's floating, then you put some padding on underneath there. Maybe it's this knee that's the issue, so you can put it under that knee. Or maybe it's both knees, so you can do that. But for some of us, this is just simply not going to work. So an alternative is shoelace pose. Shoelace is where you stack the knees on top of each other. So you move the left knee over, you move the right knee over. And for a few of us, this fits us a little bit better here. So you can try shoelace instead of square. Otherwise, if square is kind of going okay, now remember, it doesn't have to be comfortable, it just has to be non-injurious here. We'll add a lateral bend to this. By the way, if you don't want to do the lateral bend, you can stay here with a nice neutral spine, or you can fold forward. Otherwise, I'm going to suggest laterally bending over to the left here. So this is where I have my block handy. But first, I'm going to put the left hand down on the floor, and then go up tall through my spine for a moment, and then slowly release and relax the spine as I laterally bend over to the left here. And you can just stay here with your neck and your head just kind of hanging like this. But if you want a little bit more stability, the block is handy because you can put your elbow on the block, and then you can use your forearm and your hand to rest your head and your neck on. And you can adjust, if you have a fancy yoga block, you can adjust the height of the block for however far over you want to go. Right hand can do lots of things with it. Can bring it overhead, that's a little bit young. I bring it behind my torso just to remind myself that I'm trying to do a little bit of a yin lateral bend here. And then here we stay for a few minutes. So the reason why I think the seesaw or the teeter totter, maybe I should explain what it is first here. It's this A seesaw or teeter-totter is a long plank that is in the center, has a hinge or a fulcrum point in it, and then on either ends there's usually some sort of a seat and maybe a handle, so two little kids can sit in the seat on either end of the seesaw or the teeter-totter, and they can kind of push each other up and down in the air, and they get the seesaw moving, and that feels fun. That feels fun to have the seesaw balanced, the teeter-totter balanced and moving is kind of the fun thing to do with the teeter-totter here. And it's a good analogy for balance here. Because if you're just one kid, what do you do with the teeter-totter? You don't have a helper to help you make the teeter-totter move. And so maybe you want to make the teeter-totter get balanced and moved all by itself. Well, you can sit in one of the seats on one of the extreme ends of the teeter-totter and just notice that not much is probably going to happen because you're just going to be sitting there. And what you really want is you're trying to find this place where the teeter-totter is actually balanced and maybe slightly moving. So you're a little bit of a clever kid, and you finally realize that maybe just sitting on the teeter-totter, one extreme end of the teeter-totter, isn't very useful. So now you're trying to figure out where would be a useful place to be to make the teeter-totter more interesting. And what we might find out is a good place to try is the middle, the hinge, the fulcrum point of the teeter-totter. So we walk up the teeter-totter to the very middle, and maybe we have one foot on either side of the teeter-totter. And we're trying to shift our weight back and forth over that fulcrum point to see if we can actually lift both ends of the teeter-totter off the ground. And maybe what would be fun is if we could get them balanced like a scale, like have them perfectly balanced. So, but initially the teeter-totter is just like kind of swaying back and forth. Maybe that's fun enough. So you're kind of dancing there on the teeter-totter, shifting your weight and noticing how you can make the teeter-totter itself move back and forth without having a second person help you. So just one more breath here on this side of square. When you're ready, maybe put that left hand down. Use the left hand to slowly bring your torso back up. And then maybe you want to work out the kinks in your torso first. But for most of us, probably the square pose in our hips was generated a little bit more stiffness here. So when you're ready to undo your legs, maybe lean back so that it's easier to undo one leg, undo the other leg. Maybe bend both knees. I'm a big fan of windshield wipers. So both knees bob to one side and then over to the other side. The wider apart they are, the better internal rotation you get on the inner knee that's bobbing down. And then when you're ready, slowly bring yourself back. And we'll sit up for the other side of either shoelace or square pose. So now it's the other leg. It's the right leg that's on the bottom. And then try to stack the left leg on top. And then decide if you need some support underneath knees or ankles here. And you can move ankles around. By the way, you can move ankles in. You can move ankles farther apart or closer in. There's no sacred place for the ankles to be. The sacred place is the place where you're not hurting yourself. That's the sacred place here. Maybe the block comes up on the other side. Stay here, fold forward, or if you did the lateral bend on the first side, let's do the lateral bend on the other side for balance here. So maybe nice neutral spine, and then slowly begin to lean over to the right side. So you can just lean that right arm out and just kind of lean on that right arm. Maybe you can lock that arm off if you don't have a block, and you can use that arm here. Left arm again, you decide what you kind of want to do with this left arm here. Or if you have a block or some books and you want to support your head and your neck here, maybe your head and your neck are not liking the hanging, then you can support your head and your neck and you're still getting the subtle lateral bend in your torso. And then we'll stay here for a while. So you can imagine a kid in the middle of the playground. This is a hypothetical teeter-totter. So I was just thinking, in my day when I was a young kid, most of the teeter-totters and seesaws were made out of big, giant pieces of lumber and wood. And the teeter-totter itself weighed about 10 times I did. So it probably would be hard for a little tiny kid like me to get the big, giant, bulky teeter-totter to go. But we can imagine that maybe there's a teeter-totter out there that weighs very, very strong, but doesn't weigh very much. Maybe it's made out of carbon fiber or titanium, so that if you did stand at the hinge, at the fulcrum point, even if you were a little kid that didn't weigh very much, you could actually get that teeter-totter to balance. And then it depends on your intention with what you want to do. Do you want to get the teeter-totter to just stay still, perfectly balanced with both sides off the ground, or do you want it to kind of sway back and forth? Maybe that feels more fun, so you slowly shift your weight back and forth. Or maybe you try to keep it static, but it won't stay still. Wind comes up, or your body just naturally shifts. And then the teeter-totter lowers one way, so you have to shift your body weight over to the other side, and then the teeter-totter starts to lean the other way, and then you have to shift back. Notice that to keep the teeter-totter moving and to keep it balanced, you have to respond to what the teeter-totter is doing in the present moment. It doesn't matter what you think you have to do. It's like, oh, maybe I have to be here, and then the teeter-totter stays still. It's like, nope, teeter-totter moves. And it's like, no, I'm pretty sure I have to stay right here. And then the teeter-totter finally goes all the way over onto one side and it just stops there. And as long as you're thinking to yourself, well, I have to stay in this one spot for it to be balanced, but it's not balanced, not much is going to happen until you decide to shift and change to bring back the balance. So about 5 more breaths here. So now maybe the metaphor for the edge becomes more apparent, because the edge itself is like the teeter-totter. It's dynamically changing, and if you want to keep it kind of balanced and moving back and forth, you have to pay attention to what the teeter-totter is doing and respond appropriately. So if the teeter-totter is moving over to one side, you're going to have to respond with shifting over to the opposite side for a while. And then if it shifts too much that way, you might have to shift back. Oh, this is what our edge does. And this is what our edge does in a yoga practice. It shifts. And then we have to decide what kind of appropriate and useful response. And it doesn't matter what our ideals are. We have to just shift in response to what's going on in the present moment, what the teeter-totter is doing right now. Just one more breath here on this side of square pose, and then when you're ready, slowly bring yourself back up. Maybe lengthen your torso out, lean slowly back, and then release your legs, extend them out forward. Maybe point and flex the feet a few times. Maybe a few rounds of windshield wipers to release the pressure that was being generated in the hips here. And then the next yin posture is called half saddle pose. So for half saddle pose, again, maybe you don't need a prop for this pose. Maybe you need a few props. I'm going to use my yoga bolster for this prop. So I sit with legs out in front. Move the yoga bolster up so that the narrow edge is up against the backside of your torso. Again, this could be pillows and blankets here. Bend the right knee and bring the right heel on the outside of the right hip. So this is the beginnings of half saddle pose. Oh, if this is not going to happen, or if this is creating too much pain in the knee or the ankle, this is going to end up as a back bend. So I'm going to lean back, and that's going to put the back of my spine into a back bend here. But if this is going to injure this leg, then an appropriate substitution would be Sphinx pose. So for Sphinx, you just make your way onto your belly, legs extended out behind you, elbows underneath your shoulders, shoulder width apart. Release your torso into a back bend. And then just stay here and notice the compression of the back bend. Notice how it might change. And if it changes in such a way that you need to respond to it, then you can go ahead and change your edge here. Otherwise, I'll move back into my half saddle here. So you can either just stay here seated in half saddle if there's enough sensation. The next stage is to lean back a little bit. For some of us, maybe we make it all the way back onto a bolster, or maybe a few bolsters. Some of us make it all the way onto the floor. This knee can pop up off the ground and float around. You just can't be in pain. So wherever your knee ended up, if it's feeling, maybe there's a little light pressure on the knee joint, but nothing dramatic here, that's fine, wherever it ended up. And our feet and ankles do different things. So your foot doesn't have to look exactly like my foot. It can do, some people will have their foot out to the side, and that's perfectly fine. And we'll just stay here now for a couple more minutes. By the way, if you have a large range of motion and half saddle can't feel much in, you can actually do full saddle. And full saddle is just with both legs back, and then you lay back on a bolster or on the floor. We got to do both sides of half saddle. So if you're doing Sphinx pose, you can do 2 rounds of Sphinx pose for each side of half saddle. If you're practicing full saddle, then just do 2 rounds of full saddle. In other words, you're doing just one posture, but you're extending the time by twice the amount. So you're still kind of doing a deeper, more advanced version, because that's in yin. Advanced yin is to just hold these postures for a longer period of time. Same basic postures here. But again, each posture gives us a chance to examine our edge, to examine this metaphorical teeter-totter. Now in yin, the teeter-totter probably moves a lot more slowly than a normal playground teeter-totter. But it can still move, and what that means is even though we're that kid standing in the middle of the teeter-totter trying to keep both ends balanced, after a while maybe the teeter-totter starts to shift one way. That can be symbolized by maybe we're moving closer towards pain. Everything's getting more intense. What's our response? And the response is, okay, now I need to shift away from the extreme for a while so that I don't hurt myself. Or maybe the teeter-totter is kind of starting to slowly lean to the other side. What's our response to that? And that side is the side of no sensation. Now we're kind of bored because we don't feel anything, and this is just like, well, I don't know what I'm doing here. Then the idea is maybe explore going deeper into the posture to bring back some sensation, to keep our focus and to keep that balance. And notice that over time, for most of us, their edge changes either one way or the other. And the useful response is to shift our edge in the opposite, to shift our motion, our pose in the opposite direction here. So we have about 5 or 6 more breaths here in half saddle, if that's appropriate. Notice how your teeter-totter is shifting, even in these slow practices, such as yin. And it might take a few minutes. Or maybe we stay perfectly balanced, but it's never a static thing. Tree pose probably didn't feel static. That's a yang pose, and we notice the challenge of creating balance in that yang posture. Still a challenge to create balance in these yin postures. So one more breath here. And then the way to get out of half saddle, the easiest way, is to roll away from the bent leg slowly. So if you're using a bolster, you slowly roll off the bolster until you can actually release that bent leg. And then the counter pose is a systems check. Maybe make little motions with the joints in that leg to make sure that leg is still moving. So little motions in the ankle, and then in the knee, and then maybe in the hip socket. And then when you're satisfied that leg is okay, you bring yourself up, and now it's the other side of this. And again, you can do another round of Sphinx or saddle pose if half saddle is just not a good teeter-totter today. So bend the left knee, bring the left ankle on the outside of the left hip. Maybe stay here for a moment to see how this feels, and maybe you decide this is your edge. This is your balance point. Or maybe leaning back is your balance point. Or maybe coming back onto a bolster is your balance point here. Continue to breathe. Our breath is a seesaw, teeter-totter that's constantly in balance by continually moving gently back and forth. So we have that inner teeter-totter of the breath, the inner seesaw of the blood circulation here, the pulse, your pulse here. So whether on a fast scale, like on a yang type teeter-totter, where you're having to move the active and engaged muscles to shift the teeter-totter back and forth over the fulcrum point, or a slower type yin practice where the edge may stay in the relatively same place for a long period of time, and it just slowly, the texture and the feeling of that edge maybe slowly changes with the minutes that you stay here. And you notice that. And you respond to it because you've been paying attention to it. Now you can look at the opposite of this. And the opposite of this is say, no, you don't have to pay attention, you just have to follow some rules. This is called idealism. And the rule is you sit in the seat of the teeter-totter. Well, if you're just one person and you sit in the seat of a teeter-totter, and you expect the teeter-totter to balance and move for you, you're going to be waiting there for a very long time. In other words, at some point it might cross your mind that maybe it's not a very useful thing to be just sitting on the extreme edge of the teeter-totter. Maybe if you want balance, if you want motion, you're going to have to change. You're going to have to find a different spot, and maybe that spot moves, and you might have to move with that spot to maintain some motion and some balance. Maybe you decide, no, sitting in the teeter-totter is the right thing to do in the seat, and I'm just going to sit there and be content with my still teeter-totter. Maybe another kid comes along, he's a little bit bigger than you, he sits on the other side of the teeter-totter, and then he just sits there, and you're stuck up in the air, and so you get your bigger friend to come along and sit on your edge of the teeter-totter, and now the poor big kid on the other side is stuck in the air. You keep doing this, you keep getting bigger kids, because we know that your side of the teeter-totter is the better side. At some point, the poor old teeter-totter breaks due to this little battle of bigger kids. And then the Teeter Totter doesn't work at all. So just one more breath here. And then when you're ready to come out, maybe slowly roll yourself over to one side. Gently release the leg. Hopefully the leg didn't break. We had a nice Teeter Totter here. And then do a systems check on this side of the leg here to see how it moves. We can do a little bit of a yawn counter pose. After those long holds here, I'm going to suggest crocodile pose, which is the yin name for forearm plank. So maybe come to hands and knees. From hands and knees, come down onto your elbows, down onto your forearms, and then play around with extending one leg, toes press into the ground, knee is lifted, and then maybe the other leg here. So this takes some muscle engagement here, just to wake up the core muscles after the yin work here. And you can maybe move around a little bit, or do something else to kind of work out the kinks. And then maybe a supine twist. So after that, slowly make your way onto your back. Bend your knees, draw them into your chest, give them a nice hug. And then lower both knees over to one side. Maybe arms are in a T or cactus arm position here. If it's okay with your head and your neck, turn and look the opposite direction. Stay here for a breath or two, just to get the feeling of the twist. See how it feels in your torso. And then on your next inhale, bring your knees back up to center. And then lower them over to the opposite side. Head can stay neutral, or head can turn to the opposite side here, if it's acceptable for your neck. A breath or two here. And then bring the knees back up to center. Give the knees one final hug. And then now move yourself into your resting pose. You can get there by making other final movements that you need to make, or final postures. You can do this traditional Savasana where you're just lying on your back, arms and legs extended. Like I'm going to recommend legs at the wall pose for a final resting pose. So you can do this without any props, except for some wall space, of course. But you can also have some padding underneath your hip. So I'm going to practice mine with the bolster underneath my hip. So I place it against the wall to get into legs up the wall. Sit sideways against the wall, and then you'll have to kind of extend your legs and roll yourself up onto the wall here. And that's the hardest part about legs up the wall. This might take a few tries to get here. And now I've got this bolster underneath my hips, but it might feel more or less comfortable if you've got your hips on the floor here. And you can have other props. You can put a pillow underneath your head here. You can have blankets. Give yourself some time. And this is a very subtle and slow teeter-totter. So find the balance here. Find the edge in whatever Savasana position you took. It doesn't have to be legs up the wall, but if it is, then just notice your breath. Notice the slow, passive, subtle changes in your being that represent the teeter-totter. It represents the seesaw. It represents this dynamic, contrasting polarity of existence, of being here. And then continue to soften. So soften your face. Release your jaw and your face again. Release that space in between your eyes and the muscles around your eye sockets. Soften your cheeks. Soften the skin around your ears, and the crown of your head and your forehead. Soften the neurons in your brain. Let them be fuzzy. Oh, they're going to continue to fire because that's the nature of being human. Is we're thinking creatures. But you can choose to not focus on the thoughts and let them drift. They will drift in, and you can allow them to drift through. Eventually they'll drift out. And then more thoughts will come. The Teeter Totter will lean one way, and the Teeter Totter will slowly lean the other way. You can slowly adjust the focus to keep the Teeter Totter balanced and gently moving. Ultimately, it becomes a very slow dance at the fulcrum point, at the hinge of the Teeter Totter. Begin to bring yourself back. You can slowly begin to deepen your breath. And then you can start to make little motions. Maybe start making them in your extremities, like your toes and your fingers. Little wiggles. And then maybe some larger motions with feet, with hands. And gentle motions with legs, with arms. If you're lying down or you're practicing legs up the wall, bend your knees, and legs up the wall, press your feet against the wall, and you can maybe press yourself away from the wall a little bit, just enough so that you can slowly roll over to one side. And then rolling onto one side, stay there for a moment, long enough to give yourself a big thank you, to cultivate some deep gratitude for your practice and yourself. You're unique, you're diverse seesaw, teeter-totter, manifestation in this universe. The universe is ecstatically joyful that you are here. And then gently bring yourself up to a comfortable seated position. When you get there, notice your inner ground, and then bring your hands together at heart center. I'll end practice with an O. You can either join me or simply listen. The inner light in me honors the inner light in you. Namaste.